We're at the Walker Arts Center for a Regis dialogue with Isabella Rossellini, an actress of great dignity, beauty, and self-possession. Her talent is expressed in a range of films, including Fearless, Left Luggage, Big Night, and Feast of the Goat. Isabella Rossellini has risen above her own enormous beauty by taking it lightly, or using it against itself in such films as Blue Velvet, or even by playing the beer-legged lady Helen Port Huntley in The Saddest Music in the World. These are the kinds of roles that make you love an actress. I'm John Anderson, film critic, and I'll be your guide through Rossellini's work. We will now begin our Regis dialogue with Isabella Rossellini.
I always felt like protecting my dad. He was always fighting with the critics, sometimes ending up so exhausted he would check himself into a clinic for stronger doses of glucose to ready himself for the next round of battles.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the Walker Center and the terrific people here. We've been handled very well. It's a rather melancholy in that you seem to think your father's films are being forgotten.
They are. I think that the great danger is for filmmakers that they don't pay any attention to commercial success, as my dad did, because he worked with very independent productions, small companies that often went bankrupt. So there is a lot of lawsuits still today, 29 years after his death. Some of the rights are uncleared. Also, films that don't have a commercial life, they could be interesting. My father was more of an influential director than a commercial director. But I think when you studied history of cinema, all the students knew about neorealism, and they were the 16mm distribution of films that became obsolete. And because my father is not commercial, none of these 16mm were printed back into DVDs, which is now what students see on universities. So his films are not seen.
Is there, with the 100th anniversary of his birth, though, is there any move to get this stuff back in circulation? Some attempts. It's always a problem of money, and the problem was still that there are some lawsuits unresolved 29 years later. It's interesting you have Hitchcock there arguing with your father. Hitchcock is often credited with, with Psycho for killing off Janet Leigh in 30 minutes into the film. But your father actually did this with Rome Open City. Had done it 15 years before. The killing? The killing of a major character before the film was, midway through the film. I mean, Anna Magnani is killed.
Yes,
midway.
But see, you talk about it in a way like commercial films, like you don't kill a major character, you don't kill a leading lady. That's not the way my father thought. Mm-hmm. I found out this later on when I came to America, and this is an industry, film industry, so people talk a language that I never heard at home, even with my mother, like career moves. I never knew what they meant, really.
Well, you've been a big one for career moves.
Yeah. Or agent planning your thing, or not killing a character or a leading or a star, because my father just told a story that he heard in the streets. In fact, there's also the little quotation from Open City when Anna Magnani is killed. It was just something that happened, and he went back and reconstructed what happened. So I don't think he ever thought about, this is a leading character. And he also was not an actor, so he didn't have a problem of stars wanting to be liked all the time.
Oh, right. Guy Madden has written that he talked you into playing all the different characters?
Yes, he did. He was his idea. At first, I thought I was going to ask some French actors to play Hitchcock or Selznick, and Guy said, "No, you should do them because it will be clearer for the audience that this is the way you understood that this is nothing." I didn't want it to be a documentary or the ultimate. This is what my father said, because I might be wrong. This is what I understood. So interpreting everybody, it was clearer to the audience, this is what I understood of the argument of what film should be and what cinema and the importance of cinema.
Well, do you think this has been an influence on your own work with such relatively uncommercial directors who have gone completely outside the mainstream?
What was it?
Well, you said your father was an unconventional, non-commercial
yes,
filmmaker.
I'm sure it had a lot to do with it. Yeah, I feel comfortable with a director that are not in the mainstream. They feel like family to me. You know, like Guy Madden feels very much like my dad. So his film style is different. His lifestyle is similar.
Does he stay in bed alone?
Money. They are always followed by 10 fans. They love them, you know, like with a passion, but
Right,
they're 10.
Right. That's right. That's right. And they're going to see Borat right after they see him. Right. Yeah. You know, you talk about the morality of the image, and that's something that recurs a lot with you in interviews and in the film as well. You had something of a struggle when you became a model, that you found it either a stupid job, I think you said once, and...
Well, I started very late because I was told that it was stupid, you know, and God forbid, when you're 20, you want to be intelligent. But later on, you give up. You find it a relief to be stupid. I'm seeking it. But at 20,
you could go into politics, you know, if you want.
Yes. So I became a model at 28. And then they said, you know, then it was a big thing in the article, she's so old, she's so old. But nobody asked how old I was, so it's not that I hidden it or anything. I didn't even know that model had to be 14, you know.
Right.
So, but actually I did enjoy modeling quite a lot. So once I started it, I sort of repented not to have started earlier, because I did have a very long career as a model, a 20-year career. I could have had 30 or 35 if I started at 14. And I was sorry not to have done it. It was stupid stereotypes. Well, anyway, I had a good run.
Yeah. Well, I remember reading a story about you going to Taiwan and people genuflecting in front of you and kissing your hand, and you being somewhat, I think, overwhelmed at that point by the power that a single image would have.
Yes, especially advertisement. You know, Laura Dern once, the actress Laura Dern, left a message in my machine saying, "I'm doing a film in Mexico in the middle of nowhere, and there is just two things that are familiar. An advertisement sign of Coca-Cola and one of you doing some cream or something." It was, especially the Lancôme contract, lasted very long, lasted for 14 years. And that is unusual, and I think he had a cumulative impact on making my face so familiar, like Coca-Cola. Because generally, especially in fashion, it's all about change and consumerism and the next pretty girl and the next pretty girl. So it was unusual that it lasted so long.
Right. Do you think,
and it was unprecedented, even the impact.
Do you think it would happen now, that you would get that length of a career in just the changes in the last 10 years or so?
See, to me, it was always stupefying that I was so successful as a model, especially in the Lancôme ads, and they didn't attempt to either repeat it or they let me go. I still wonder why. They did hire my daughter lately. Thought it was a good sign.
Well, speaking of daughters, David Lynch once said something in an interview that when he first met you, he said, "You could be Ingrid Bergman's daughter." And someone said, "You idiot, she is Ingrid Bergman's daughter."
But that happens to me quite a lot.
Really?
Because I look like my mom. And sometimes I catch a cab especially when I was younger, I would catch a cab and the taxi driver said, "Oh, I thought I was picking up Ingrid Bergman." You know, it was surprising.
But you never
Once I thought I was Ingrid Bergman. That was the strangest. That was amazing, because when I was growing up, Mom, we were always told, "Oh, you look so much like your mom," and even my mom and I, we said, "Oh, we looked at each other in the mirror and said, no, we don't look, our nose is different, this is different. So we didn't think we looked that much alike. And then years later, I once entered into an antique shop, and I was walking around, and I see a lady that is a little bit like she had a body language like she didn't want to be approached. So I was trying to be discreet and walk away from her. And as I was just looking at her, I said, she's elegant, very nice lady. She reminds me so much of my mom, strange. And then it was me. It was the reflection of the mirror. There was this old mirror in this antique shop. I didn't recognize myself, but I thought I looked like Ingrid Bergman myself. And I thought, how strange, because people always say, oh, you're so warm. Instead, if I find myself a little bit like that body language of, and I thought, though, that I was ladylike and elegant.
Yeah.
And I was pleased about that.
Did you eventually go up and say hello? We were talking about, I think the issue of morality is a fascinating one vis-a-vis your career, because some of the movies that you've made have been...
Immoral.
No, but, well, I didn't want to say that. It's, I think when this movie came out, the nuns in your old high school held masses for the redemption of your soul.
Yes,
Is that true? That's what I heard. Can you, one of the things that's so fantastic about this clip is how beautiful this movie is. Mm-hmm. I mean, they show everything here on film, and it's just such a beautiful looking film.
Yes,
of course, you get
Fred Helms, the director of photography.
But what do you, maybe you can tell us about Frank and how you and he, about your rapport, so to speak.
Well, Dennis was one of the last actors to be hired, so I didn't know who was going to be Frank. And then I received a call from David Lynch, all excited. He said, it's going to be Dennis Hopper. Do you know him? And I said, sure, I know Dennis Hopper. What happened to him? Because we haven't heard from him in many years. He said, oh, he was just 3 years in rehab, but he just came out. And 3 years in rehab. And he didn't want to meet, we became quite good friends, but my first scene that I played with Dennis is the scene that started here and then follows into this very ritualized rape. And it was the first scene that I had to shoot with Dennis. And I asked if I could meet him just for breakfast or just to have a feel. And he came very bored, very hostile. What do you want? You want to talk about the scene? No. Very difficult, I have to say. Later on, I thought that he did it to try to recreate the relationship and make me feel uncomfortable. Wow. But it was difficult first scene, for sure. It was one of the first scene we had to shoot in the film. There's been over the years much discussion about Dorothy Valens, this character, mm-hmm. and what a damaged character she is. Yes. I think I recall you having gotten some inspiration for her from that sort of iconic photo from the Vietnam War of the girl running down the street naked with yes. Who had been in a napalm attack. I think everybody knows that picture, right? It's yes. Well, I took that gesture for a scene later on in the film where I come out of the bush and walk in the streets. David Lynch told me that something happened to him when he was a little boy, and he was coming back from school with his brother, and they saw a lady walking in the street naked, and they weren't titillized or didn't, but they started to cry. The two boys started to cry, and he said, I want to have the same effect. I want that Dorothy Valens walking in the street to be a terrifying image. And when he was talking to me, telling me the story, this image of Nick Ut came to mind, because there's this little girl that walks in the street with this complete helplessness in the gesture and everything. And I then read the description of the photograph. I thought that she was having things hanging, and I thought it was her clothing. Actually, it was a skin. And I remember that the gesture seemed so, and she's completely naked, it seemed so desperate and helpless that I took it for Dorothy, though I wished for a long time because I knew that I had to be totally exposed, and for a long time I thought of a different solution where I could protect myself as an actress so that I could cover. But any gesture of covering would give Dorothy a sense of dignity, a sense that she still had a sense of decency. Instead, she had to be completely broken, and I think that's what makes that photo so impactful, is that the gesture shows that she has lost everything. And so I did it, and we were shooting in the street of Wilmington, North Carolina, in the evening, and people came out with their blanket and picnic and children, and I called David and I said, David, you got to tell them that this is going to, they can't stay with their grandmother and the children. They can't, So David went and started to talk to them, and people were already in a sort of a film mood. So people talked and they just listened. But if you listen to a screen, you don't answer back.
Yeah.
So David would say, would you please move, because this scene is going to be violent. I'm sure you're going to be shocking. Then I went out, same reaction. They didn't know if it was real or if it was part of the film. So then we had to do the scene. The next day, the police came and they took away the rights to shoot any more in the streets for us. We had to shoot only, inside the building. So.
Well, other than that, I mean, it must have been a traumatic part to play, I'm guessing.
Well, it wasn't traumatic to play because, see, I think that I don't know, in my experience, when you feel safe, you can be very free for a film. You can risk. In fact, when I read the script, I asked David if I could do all the scenes with him and Kyle MacLachlan, who was in town in New York, just to see if it was in the same wavelength, because I saw Dorothy as a victim, somebody who had a sort of Stockholm syndrome and was completely mad. But I wasn't sure. You could read the script, maybe she was instead more of a seducer, so I didn't know. So we did all the scenes to be clear that was the person I wanted to play. And then David was very protective and created a very... See, I don't know if you feel threatened, I close up and I become more formal. But if it is very safe, this is where you can launch yourself and be free, because you always know that if you go too far, the director is not going to edit, or later on, if you say in that moment I was doing maybe something that now I repent, he would have the honesty to say, well, if you don't want me to edit that, I won't. So there was a sense of great, more than camaraderie, friendship and trust in the set. That's why I think we could go so far.
Other than the nuns back in Italy,
yes.
You must have gotten, I mean, the reaction to this film was so extreme when it first came out.
Yes, very, yeah.
It's tempered a bit over the years, but what did people say to you when they saw this film?
Well, I have to say that I think that David too has the 10 big fans that follow him.
Yeah.
And I didn't have them. So, and the people that liked the film, and there were more than the 10 usual fan, obviously said it was a David Lynch film. The people that didn't like the film seemed to all come to me, because then they said, oh, you did it because you want to rebel against your Lancôme image. You did it because you're angry at your mother, who was such a Hollywood icon. They had all these strange stories attached to it, and rather, I do a film and each project is separated. I don't do a project and then do a project to slam what I've done before. So I felt that and I felt very bad about it, because I felt that coming in with so much baggage, of my family, or Lancôme being on the cover of this beautiful magazine, I maybe tinted the film somehow. David didn't want me first. He wanted Helen Mirren. And I kept on saying, Helen, you should have said yes. See, and now I've ruined it, because I came with this baggage of glamorous, beautiful, the nudity, it was a violent nudity. I saw myself like a butcher, I used to say. I would imagine this have cut
Raw meat.
That you see, sometimes you see these animals skinned, and that's what I wanted the nudity to be. But the people were so used to nudity being titillating and sexy that they thought I just failed. And then on top of it, I was always representing beauty in a glamorous world. So I thought, oh my God, when I accepted to do the film, I didn't understand that I came with an image. And now I have compromised David Lynch's artistry, because if you had another actress who didn't have all this, they probably would have understood right away that she was doing nudity to be scary nudity and not sexy, glamorous nudity. So I felt bad for quite a while.
Yeah. Now, it seems to me that worked in its favor, ultimately.
David?
That it was you.
Yeah. No, but at the time it was pretty violent, the reaction at first. Yeah.
A cowboy.
Yeah, I want one. Strong, silent, like a statue. Cool, always there.
One of the reasons I wanted to show that clip was because she seems to be the kind of character you could have made a career playing.
Yes.
Elegant, gorgeous, kind of continental, and.
But I did, didn't I?
I know.
I mean, not so in films. Maybe my career is more difficult to find a thread. But I mean, modeling, for sure, I did. I did do the sophisticated international lady.
Mm-hmm. I suppose you need to have seen the entire film to know exactly what's going on with her, but there's a lot going on internally. And I think, she's paired up with Ian Holm, who's kind of the most obnoxious man in the world in this film. And when she's talking about going west, I presume she's thinking about going somewhere.
Well, I imagine the character in Midnight to also be quite an opportunist. Beautiful, all done up, playing the role, and also looking for a man with money, And I imagined her, I mean, in the film I have the affair with the character played by Stanley Tucci, who has the restaurant, who is unsuccessful, and yet, so I imagined her to be a manipulator, a woman she wanted wealth, money. She never thought about working, because she could get the man to work for her. And so that type. And I shaped her a little bit physically after Gina Lollobrigida, who, with the hair and the attitude. I often, sometimes, maybe because I am a model, but often an iconic figure helps, or painting too. Some films, I did Frida Kahlo, sort of impersonation, or sometimes I need an image an image in my head of somebody. For Dorothy Valance, it was like, when I was a little girl, I had a little Japanese doll, and he had hair cut like this, and the eyebrows were painted, and and I thought, oh, Dorothy Valance should have this heavy makeup and the wig, because she needs a facade for the world to hide the confusion and the torment and that she has inside. She keeps this facade, and so is the blue eyeshadow, the red lipstick, the black hair. Everything is perfect like a little doll. And sometimes I need this it helps me to create character, to have a style physically, wig. Maybe because I'm a model and I understand clothing and how you create characters with it.
Right. If she were an actress, she would not have appeared in this movie, however, because there was no money, right?
There was no money, no. Most of the film I do, there's no money.
Right. Well, that's what I wanted to ask. I mean, you seem to have, I don't know, do you feel an obligation, or is it just more interesting to work with these people? I mean, how did you get involved with Big Night? Because I know it was a kind of a homegrown project. Tony Shalhoub had co-written the script, I believe, and Stanley Tucci.
Stanley Tucci and Campbell Scott.
And Campbell Scott co-directed it.
Co-directed it and wrote it. And I was friendly with Campbell Scott. I don't know really the reason why I make so many unusual films. I think that some of it has to do being Roberto Rossellini's daughter, so that if somebody comes and say, I have no money, but I want to make a film, and there's something interesting, I don't even think about money. I say, okay, sure, let's do it, as it has been the case with Guy Maddin. And also it's fun. Sometimes when I do commercial films, I feel a little bit lost. I feel I can never really have a big career. And then I get lost in the strategy of this career move that one is supposed to do. I don't really have the culture of it. I know what they mean, but I don't really truly know what it meant or how it can be applied to me. And sometimes in commercial films, you have to hit a stereotype, because there's good person and bad people and good people and you're in love or not in love. Everything is very clear. And I think being a foreigner, I have a hard time grabbing it. When I see Julia Roberts' film, for example, I really admire that it is so pleasant to look at her and so pleasant the way she tells the story. And yet it's more of an idea of a person, a wish that people or girls have to be the Julia Roberts on screen. How did she make it so simple? I don't understand it. I always see the complexity, and I always do darkness because I see life like that. And I think that prevents me from being commercial. I'm too heavy. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I think that it's partially because I'm a foreigner, and I see, when I see it, I enjoy it as an audience, but I don't know how to do it.
Well, have you ever thought that maybe you just didn't want to waste your time on frivolous movies?
No, I would have liked the money.
Another reason I wanted to show this particular clip is because you are so elegant in it, and it made me think of when you were a little girl. You were very ill. I mean,
Yes.
you had scoliosis and you had to have major surgery.
The major surgery, I was sick for about a year and a half.
Yeah,
too.
and it sounded like quite the ordeal, and yet it worked apparently.
Yes, it worked. Yes. Yeah, I was sick. I had a scoliosis that could be not very severe, but in my case it was quite severe. So I had the fusion of 13 vertebrae, so I'm completely rigid. The people say that I'm regal, but there is a reason for it. I can't bend. But he has given me a regal reputation.
I see. Okay, so I did it. I did it ass
fooled.
backwards, basically.
You were fooled.
Right.
We have lived together for 16 years. They have been great.
Not always.
Yes, always. They've always been great for me. Even when I hate you, I know I love you.
That is from Fearless,
Yes.
directed by Peter Weir. Your character, Laura Klein, is the wife of Jeff Bridges, who has survived the plane crash and has come away from it slightly altered, I suppose we could say. It's one of the more conventional roles you've done, but she's a woman of a lot of control, I
Yes.
think. What was this like, this making this film?
Well, she was the wife, and already when you play the wife, it's always boring. It's always the mistress, the whore, that's always fun, the murderess. But Peter, and obviously the big role in that film was the one that Rosie Perez played, a dramatic role, that she won an Academy Award nomination for it. But Peter gave me a direction. And it's interesting how it's helpful when director create an image in your head of the character you have to play rather than give you a literal, you come in, enter, do this gesture, walk over there. It's almost, you become like a robot. And he said to me, play her like a tango. Play her like not a tango, like flamenco. He said, and to me that meant so much because I know that she had to be fiery, but all controlled. You know how it is. The flamenco is all very fiery and very strong, but very controlled always. And that to me was that image, like I had Gina Lollobrigida or the photo of Nick Nutt. It was an image that I could play this woman very attached to her family, very willing to make the marriage survive. In love with their husband, but not sentimentally in love with her. Not sentimental about it, brutally, you know. And there she is, you know. And it was wonderful, that image of flamenco for me.
Yeah, well, knowing the film, it makes perfect sense now that you say that. Yeah, it does. You know, there's so much going on internally with her. And it reminds me of something we were talking about it actually just before, about when you worked for Richard Avedon, or worked with Richard Avedon. And you said that he could tell the changes that were going on in your mind, not necessarily what you were thinking, but whether you were...
It was extraordinary.
Yeah.
I remember posing in front of the camera. First of all, a lot of photographers, they just take a lot of photographs, they have this, and then they do editing. Not Richard Avedon. Richard Avedon, we were already done up. We put you in front of the camera, and he would say, you know, the camera is here, and he's not behind the camera, he's next to it and watching it, waiting for you to do something. And then very quickly, it almost felt like a fisherman catching the fish. Bang! He would take the photo, and then he'd wait and for you to have another expression that he liked. It was really wonderful. And I remember he was also incredibly articulated. He said to me, you know, modeling is not a big art, like being a painter or being a sculptor, but it is a little bit art. It's like being a good embroiderer or something like that. But it's true, it's not a big art, but you still need to do something. You can't just be beautiful and be in front of the camera and wait. You've got to do something. And he said to me, you know, I photograph emotions and I photograph thoughts. So you have to have a thought. And he waited for me to have my thought. So I'll start thinking of something, and then he would say, I don't like that thought. So I'd think of something else, he would take the photo. And at a certain point, and he was giving this direction, I said, I want to go back to the thought he told me not to have. I want to see if he can see it, because he seems so acute. It's true that I always noticed that he took, the flash went on when my mind slightly got distracted because of the thought took over. And he seemed to always know that instant, because maybe it's when my eyes or my expression looked fully concentrated, not that I was still knowing that the camera was there and part of me was being pretty and part of me was thinking, but when the thought distracted me from the rest, that was the flash. It was incredible. So I went back to the first thought I had, and instantly he said, no, I told you, no, I don't like that. So when it was his 70th birthday, I sent him a tape. I said, since you can read my mind, here it is. That was my happy birthday. He got it. He said, thank you for the happy birthday you sent me. I said, no doubt you would know.
Right. Well, when you make the transition into acting, is that a conscious? Are you thinking about that when you're acting? Can you control yourself? Can you control your expression and your thought process in that way? No, you don't.
No, you can't. I think that's when I would say bad acting comes. Sometimes I remember Jeff Bridges, old fox, said to me, you know, because sometimes the directors, they don't even want you to know what lens they use, if you are shot here or on full length. And Jeff Bridges said, you know, without upsetting the director and saying, you know, which lens do you use or how do you see me, you just go by the monitor and just give it a look. Because sometimes if you're small, if the photographs the room and you are this big in this, and you are making the saddest expression you can ever, but you are this big, they don't see it. So you better think like a sculpture, and if you find a position where your body language is a little bit more emphatic of the feeling that you want to express in that long shot, it will be clearer for the audience. So it's not that you always go from the outs, you know, most of the time I work from inside out. I mean, I concentrate until the feeling rises, and I don't know exactly what my hands are doing, what my face does. But occasionally, at the beginning of a scene, I would decide that I would sit in a chair in a certain way, or I would enter a room with a certain, you know, just to start a body language. But then I let the emotion carry. I never know. Sometimes a director or the continuity, they say, oh, do again what you did with your hands. I don't know what I did with my hands, because it's the emotion that makes you do it, and you don't really. I think if you do it too mechanically, it will come across as too mechanically. I think there's two ways of acting. One, you suggest. Well, you see a lot of that on television, where you really sometimes the actors suggest to the poor audience at home, this is going to be funny, you know. And, you know, there is always. The actor seems to be in the scene but also with you at home, and they're always suggesting to you what they're trying to do. They don't seem to be quite completely in the scene. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it makes sense.
Is that like Julia Roberts and the make-believe characters?
Yeah. Sometimes. A lot of stars have that. Even Cary Grant has it, you know. He's not really in the scene. Half of him is with you and carrying you along, and I don't know how to do that.
Well, you know, one of the other things that strikes me about Fearless is that it's more of what I would think of as a serious movie for you, because
it was very simple, plane crash.
Yeah, no, but I mean, in that sense that you're not just the plane crash, but what you're saying about you know, some of the things you've done have been tongue-in-cheek. Some have been, you know, completely hysterical or extreme. This is more matter-of-fact, and I'm just guessing a much more taxing kind of role, because you're operating on a different level than you would in Blue Velvet or Wild at Heart, or you know.
And Peter is a very severe director. You know, he can catch any moment where you're not concentrated or you're faking it, or it's unclear to you what the scene is or how you go from this feeling to the other and you cover it up. It instantly catches you. But it was wonderful to work with him. I felt if you are very well into the scene and understand it, and Peter allowed a lot of rehearsal and improvisation with the actors. We improvised, Jeff and I, we improvised in front of Peter lots of our scenes without using the dialogue that was written, but repeating like if we had a couple fight, we would do an hour of improvisation for Peter, of fighting over, why are you talking to me? What do you mean that you need to see this other woman because she was in a plane crash with you? What does she have that I don't have? Mm-hmm. Why is it that she moves you and I don't move you? What about me and the son we have together? So we would do that argument for an hour, for real, and then we would go back to the text. And by then you had really a feeling that the text is just a collapsing, a synopsis of what you've done, but you have all the feeling full. And that there is never time, directors don't do it, there is not the tradition of doing it, or they don't make time, or they don't have the authority to demand. Because producer and everybody else, often especially me that do a lot of small parts, I seldom even see the director. I see it the day I go on the set, I play the scene. Uh-huh. I never discuss it with anybody. They seem that if you can read it, you'll have to know it. I don't know how. I mean, you know the words, but you don't really know exactly the tone. Very little repetition, very little rehearsal. So it was delightful to work with Peter. It was a scene where Jeff Bridges walks on the roof of a building, and it looks like he may want to commit suicide or fly, or he's hallucinating, and me playing the wife arrives on the roofs and sees him there, and I call him back, and we played the scene several times, and one time I played it. Oh my God, he wanted to commit suicide, so I was very protective, very maternal, very worried, but on the other hand, very protective. And then one of the scenes, and I think Peter edited, I grab him, he comes back, and I slap him. And it was unplanned, and I think Peter took that. There is many reactions that are correct emotionally, and this one, to slap him with the anger, what the fuck are you doing? Seemed also correct, that you can, and the director chooses, you give them hopefully many choices and all of them right. Because emotions, they are irrational, so you have to have them with you and then let them lead you wherever.
So this scene followed an hour
Yes.
of improv?
Yes.
You know, there's an interesting thing happens here, for those who know the movie. Your sympathies shift in this scene from Jeff Bridges, who is the ostensible hero of the film, to you. And I don't know if this was a matter of discussion, but he almost seems to help you with his facial. He's got a strange smirk on his face, and the whole weight of the film. I mean, you become the sympathetic character rather than he, and he starts to begin to look selfish. And was it anything you discussed or?
No, but Peter is highly intelligent, you know, and he wouldn't let any, you know, he likes the challenge of many minds at the full potential. So we also extensively, as we were doing the scene and we were improvising on Saturday and Sunday, we will do the improvisation with Peter and the writer. And they would occasionally take things out of our improvisation to fine-tune or maybe just make it more. I never had difficulty saying, because English is not my first language, Peter's ear is so tuned in that he will always rewrite to make it so that it was my word, that I could feel comfortable. Some directors or writers are very attached to their words, and they become words that I would say for the first time, and you always see that hesitation or a phrasing that it would be too American for a foreigner who would phrase it differently. So they did all that. So all that was tremendously helpful to become the character. And I think this shift of sympathy, as you know, that he goes from Jeff Bridges to me, I think is old Peter, because it's the complexity of life, and he certainly doesn't shy away from it. And the complexity of life is always, where is the right and the wrong, and we wish to know, but we never know.
I think anyone who's been in a relationship can recognize this conversation. It doesn't have to be this subject matter. It doesn't have to involve a plane crash, but it could be something.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you said other directors. Can you perhaps discuss some of the other directors you've worked with whose clips we're not showing tonight?
Yes. Well, I think the one that I felt most comfortable with was John Schlesinger. He was so paternal and so protective, and I've never really thought until I worked with John that I was an actress. It was the same year that I've done Fearless. I think I done John's film, and then I went to do Fearless. And
the film was?
It was called The Innocent. And that's how I met Campbell Scott, and then did Big Night with Campbell. He called me. Whenever, you know, when you travel, they give you this landing card where you have to describe who you are. And when I was a model, I always wrote student, because I said, I'm a model, I'm not a model. You know, I never felt like so beautiful, though I did have the cover of Vogue and all that. I don't know, it was always embarrassing to me. Then when I became an actress, I wrote model, because I felt more of a model than an actress. But it was after working with John Schlesinger that I had the courage to write actress, because he was the only one who gave me the feeling that he didn't need me. He could hire anybody who would want to work with him. And I felt chosen. You know, and I probably all the other director chose me. You know, no, that was never imposed. But there was a sense of trust, a sense of he gave me confidence that I didn't have before. So from John on, now when I'm asked what do you do, I say actress, very simply, like that.
Well, do you feel that some directors have taken you, have asked you to work with them because of who you are, or what you can bring, you know, even financially to a project?
There is always a little bit of that. Yes, there is always that aspect, because the financial aspect of every film is so difficult. You know, even a film that it's not. That is the great tragedy of cinema. I think, I don't know painting or sculpture that much, but I would imagine that you just need a canvas and colors, or you just need paper and a pen. But in films, you need money, because it's not enough. You need actors, you need music, you need cinematographer, costume designer. even the smallest idea, it's $500,000. You know, the smallest budget you can imagine, it could be even the little film that I did, my dad is 100 years old. Yeah. It was $100,000. $100,000. You know, it's amazing how expensive it is, cinema.
Guy Madden making $100,000 movie. That's funny. Because he always seems, his aesthetic seems to be to make things look as inexpensive as possible.
As possible, yeah.
Right.
No, but films, we didn't earn much money. I didn't get paid. I didn't want to get paid, but
for your film?
Films. Yes, for my film.
Oh. But
it just film cost money. It just so many people, the location, the labs, the post production. You know, film is always expensive. So there is I think more than any other art suffers from this. Is torn between commerce and art. You feel it more in film. So I do think that I'm often higher, whether I can bring some little money from Europe or I can package with a group of people.
Yeah. Well, it's a trend in independent film that they seem they need a well-known name to get off the ground. Yeah. I wonder what your father would have done in the age of digital video.
Oh, he would have been delighted, because that makes the crew so much lighter and so many things can be resolved. And we do see it. We see more and more artists being freed from crews and from money, and the video art becoming more and more important.
Well, what did Guy shoot your film on?
Guy generally uses 8 millimeters. It uses a different format. So my dad is 100 years old. It was 8 millimeter and video.
Because he told me once that he does all the special effects in the camera, basically.
Mostly, yes. Yeah. Mostly.
I forgot to ask you before, that stomach. Who is that anyway?
One is a big pillow. Oh, okay. And the last one, where I'm lying on top of my dad in the last scene. And the other one was a guy who had a pizza shop and ate probably a lot of them because he had a big stomach. So Guy had the courage to ask him, would you like to be in a film, but I just need your belly? And he said yes, and he was delightful. And he got into the part. It was, we shot my dad is 100 years old in 3 days. And Isaac was there, always with his belly exposed. And he got into the film. He understood it because I would play my role, I would play my father's voice. And at the beginning, he didn't do anything. And he looked, he would just breathe normally. And I would say, Guy, my father has this, I was talking with a very excited voice, and the stomach must have that tension. So we would talk to Isaac, who was, a pizza place. He wasn't an actor. By the end of the 3rd day, he was making that belly so expressive, angry, relaxed, sad. He became so expressive, it was great.
He didn't make a face around his navel or anything. We're going to go to another clip now. This is from the saddest music in the world, which I just adore this movie. And it has my favorite line. It's not your line, it's Maria de Medeiros' line. I'm not an American, I'm a nymphomaniac.
I'm not an American, I'm an nymphomaniac.
Listen to the sounds of Winnipeg.
We will be hosting a worldwide contest to determine which nation's music truly deserves to be called the saddest in the world.
Guy sent the script to my agent and sent some of the films that he had done before, because he thought I didn't know him, and in fact I didn't know him.
You didn't?
No, I never heard of him. And then the agent, by law, because a lot of people give the script and say, we don't want to give him to your agent because then your agent wouldn't show them to you. But the agent, by law, has to show everything that comes, that is an offer, that he proposes me, But so he sent all the material home, and I got all this stack of film and a big script, and I read the first page, and, Guy writes so gothically, I said, oh my God, what is this? And then I looked in the pile, and it was one film, there was 6 minutes. I said, okay, 6 minutes, I'll give him 6 minutes. So I start with this one, and it was The Heart of the World, that it is absolutely wonderful. It was done for the 25th anniversary of the Toronto Film Festival, and the Toronto Film Festival commissioned 4 or 5 Canadian directors to do a small film. And when I looked at it, I mean, I said, I'm going to work with him. I mean, there's 6 minutes, you know. And then the only doubt I had is that maybe it was very crazy. And so I called him and I said, I want to meet you. And he said, where is Winnipeg? Because I didn't even know Winnipeg. So he said, oh, it's not very far from New York. So you go to Toronto and then there is a connecting flight. So I said, I'll come and meet you. And we'll stay 1 or 2 days together to talk about the film. And then I'll tell you yes or no. So I went. Winnipeg wasn't so close. No. From Toronto, it was straight north. I looked down, the tundra. Ice, ice, ice. I arrived in Winnipeg, it was 40 below zero. And when I arrived, and already at Toronto, you know, when people say, oh, would recognize me. Oh, Miss Rossellini, where do you go? I said, oh, Winnipeg. Oh, really? Oh, poor you. And I thought, that was a strange reaction. And so when I arrived, Guy was waiting for me, and we were at the luggage waiting for my bag to arrive. And Guy, as a chit-chat, decided to say, you know, it's so cold in Winnipeg that when my grandfather died in November, we had to wait until March before we could bury him. And then there was a flood, so we buried him, and the flood came, and the river took him down 3 or 4 miles, so we had to take the body and bring him back. By then he was, you know, a 9-month-old body, and we had to bury him again, and that was his chit-chat, and I thought, I'm going to work with him. This is going to be fun. So I did stay another day or two to watch film and you know, prepare the character, but I already decided, waiting for the luggage, that I was going to work with Guy.
Well, you shot this in ungodly weather, right? I mean, wasn't it?
Yes, it was
the whole time?
Yes, we shoot inside a hangar where they build bridges. It was huge. And because the weather, you know, we had to have some control, so they shoveled all this snow in, and they built this huge set, but it became like a refrigerator. It was sometimes colder inside the set than outside, because sometimes the temperature with a little bit of sun would rise. So we would always outside, it was only 40, and then inside, I don't know, it was 50 below. It was very cold. Maria de Madeira fainted several times. But me, good Swede, I didn't, I felt. Which was Portuguese, I was Swedish. Right. I felt very competitive over who was going to stand.
Would you, can we take some questions at this point?
Yes, sure.
I think we should. You might have to lift the lights a little. And there are microphones going around. And I guess I'll just point at someone, and if I can see. How about this gentleman on the aisle here?
Yes.
I wanted to know if, when you were a child, if you had any contact with Anna Magnani, because your father ostensibly made her a star.
Yes.
And but their relationship, I imagine, was very tumultuous, and she was very volatile. And I was just wondering if your mother would not allow her to be around you.
Well, Anna Magnani was very hurt when father left her to be with my mom. So they weren't friendly. The mother was always very conciliatory, always spoke to her very highly. But I don't remember them together. I remember visiting Anna Magnani with my dad, but being very afraid of her. They seemed to be very friendly, but always looking down. In fact, I've written a scene that was not done in my film, where I do visit Anna Magnani and I just see the feet. And there were these very pink slippers she had with a little, you know, like this little feathers. They were very feminine, which I didn't expect her to have. And then she had a lot of cats and dogs. So I did have a scene in My Dad is 100 Years Old, but we cut it. It was just written, of Anna Magnani's feet with all these cats and dogs. Some of them very deformed, because I think they made love to one another. And so the generation of cats afterward, they were all crippled. And we had that scene, but it was cut. That's in my memory, my personal memory of Anna Magnani was that. And then when Anna died, she was buried we have a family crypt in Rome. And Anna had not organized for herself the tomb, so she was buried. Now his son took her away, but for many years she stayed in our family crypt. And my aunt That also gave me a sense of Anna Magnani relationship with other members of the family besides my father. My aunt said one day we went to clean the crypt. She said, Anna, she was pushy alive and she's pushy when she's dead. Because she was taking the place of one of the Rossellini without being one.
Yes, sir.
I'm wondering why you choose to live in the United States. You could live in Italy or Sweden. I mean, who's to extent?
Yeah, yes.
So
yeah.
what do you like about the United States and what?
I'm going to answer something that is so conventional that you'd say, oh, she's bullshitting us. Freedom. There is a freedom in the United States. And now, I mean, come from Italy, it's a democratic, free country. But there is a social control that it's much higher. There is the bella figura, it's called, in Italy. Is to impress your neighbor. To impress the neighbor, you can't do this. What would the neighbor think? You wouldn't believe it, how heavy it is. And here everything is light, and everything is a possibility, and people understand experiment. And though you want to be successful in America, because it's all about being successful and making money, but you are allowed to try and fail. And if you fail, that's it, you start another one. In Europe, it's a tragedy. You do a film that is bad, or you do something that is a failure, and it's such a stigma. And I think that's why I remained. I could be playful, I could be experimental. I can be playful. I mean, I don't know that I do art. I just play. When something is intriguing and interesting, I'll do it. And you can do it here. This lightness, the lightness of being.
Yes, sir.
In fact, I was intrigued by your portrayal of Alfred Hitchcock, who was so influential in your mother's own career.
Yes.
And I was curious about how you think of your career in comparison to your mother's when she had this amazing rise to stardom coming from abroad, the exotic international star, and then her fall from grace when she went to live with your father and the kind of revulsion that she faced in this country.
Yeah. Well, I didn't live through it because I was too little, and it was my brother, who was older than I, 2 years, was the child of the scandal. My mother, she was this big Hollywood star, big box office draw, and she saw some of my father's film that came from Italy, Open City and Paesa. And by the time she saw the second film, Paesa, she decided she was going to write my father a letter wanting to work with him, because she thought if I could bring my fame, my popularity to an incredible director that lives in this poor, bombed Italy and give him a chance, it would be fantastic. And they fell in love. And my mother was married. And by the time my father and mother did their first film, Stromboli, my mother became pregnant while she was still married. So this was a huge scandal in the United States, and she became persona non grata, and she was not allowed to come back. I wish she was allowed, but even the Senate took a stand against her. Because the Senate has always had, in America there is always this problem that still exists of, and I have a problem with it. I mean, I'm not dismissing the problem of morality in films and how much do you influence, what is your moral responsibility as an actor. And I have to say that I have always heard something that it is a double standard, that it's hard for me also to accept, though I'm completely against censorship. But that is, I would never understood why I would make a 30-second commercial knowing that I would influence people to buy a cream, and then you do a 2-hour movie, and then they say, oh no, the audience understand that this, you can murder people, but they understand there's no influence on them. I could never understood this double standard. So anyway, Hollywood at the time was concerned about actors in general, because actors would become so famous and they would be so influential on the new generation that they became icons and role models. And there was no checking on the actor's morality or background, as you do for politician or you do for a big executive or
Ted Haggard,
CEO.
you know, something.
And so there was an attempt at the time to ask the studio that if she saw a rising star, to check and make sure that they deserved to become star, because a star also would carry a social responsibility. So is that person ready to deal with that? And so my mom became the example of somebody who hadn't been checked and was completely immoral and was a foreigner. And here we have now Ingrid Bergman, who's going to bring bigamy to America, and the fans will follow her. I think that was the logic of this great attack. And that's why the Senate took a stand in trying to promote a law that would screen actors, and studios would decide, this one has a potential to be a star, but does it have the moral standing to be? So that was the case. I don't know that Hitchcock, actually later on, after I've done this film, I showed my films to Charlotte Chandler, who is a fantastic writer, writes wonderful biography of several directors, and she wrote one on Hitchcock. And she said, "Oh, Hitchcock loved your father's film." I said, "Really?" I thought he never did. First of all, stylistically, but then I saw in my mother's archive that we kept at Wesleyan University that he would write letters to her saying, "Oh, come back to Hollywood, this is where you belong. You just had a crush on Roberto Rossellini, snap out of it." And so I assumed that he didn't like my father's work. But apparently, according to Charlotte, Hitchcock did like my father's work, but he didn't like the fact that it took Ingrid Bergman away from him.
Okay.
Grazie mille for coming here tonight. I am very impressed with the results you get from improvisation before, shooting the scenes. And you mentioned earlier about freedom in America, and I hope that you have freedom with your directors. I just wonder, what do you prefer, working from a script or taking the time to improvise and work with other actors to get their
I don't think it's possible to do a little bit of improvisation, but you can't really do an improvisation because a scene in a film is about a minute or 2 minutes. But in life, it's a synthesis, because if you take a fight between husband and wife, maybe the argument is an hour long, but the scene is a minute. But you have the impression as the audience that you've been participating for an hour. So the great mastery of the writers is to collapse and do a synthesis that is a minute long, but you understand. So which is the key sentence? Which is the key things? It's really extraordinary. So when you decompose that, and I think that the improvisation and the rehearsal, it's great to do before, so that you understand it fully, what's behind every word, and you take the synthesis of the minute scene and you re-enlarge it so that you know exactly what you're saying and what you're doing. But I don't think you can really improvise in front of, sometimes you do, but if you improvise in front of the camera, you have these scenes that go, and they're shapeless, and they're very boring to watch because there's too many words and you repeat yourself. No, it has to be just an exercise that you do with the actors. There's another exercise that I love a lot with actors, and it's to reverse the role. So that I would take, for example, Jeff Bridges' role, and Jeff Bridges takes my role, and then we would run lines, because you would see the other person's point of view. So anything that makes you understand really the many, many, many layers, then you can do the same thing as the writer did, find a synthesis in a gesture or in an emotion or the leap, but you have to have the full information.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't read that. I'm making a question to Miss Isabella Rossellini. As you said, it's like one of the 10 people to following the David Lynch. And before you took that part, as maybe you know that his reputations industries and his movies. And how did you get that part, and why did you, take that part?
The Blue Velvet part.
Yes, Blue Velvet.
David, he did Elephant Man, and that was the only film I'd seen of David Lynch at the time. He had also done, after Elephant Man, he did Dune, but I think he came out Dune, but he was not successful. And then when I received the script of Blue Velvet, I went to see Eraserhead. And I was very surprised by Eraserhead because it was so radically different than, I didn't see Dune, but Elephant Man was so poetic and so classic in a way, and then he could be so avant-garde. He wanted Helen Mirren, as I said before, and I had just done a film called White Nights with Helen Mirren about ballet with Misha Baryshnikov and Gregory Hines. And I went to dinner with a relative of Dino De Laurentiis, and David Lynch was eating in the same restaurant with another relative of Dino De Laurentiis. So the relatives said hello, and we were introduced, and then we sat down at their table to have a drink. And David, that's where he said, "You could be Ingrid Bergman's daughter." It was answered, "You're an idiot," she is. And then he said, "Are you an actress too?" And I said, "Yes, I just finished a film with Baryshnikov and Helen Mirren." He said, "I want Helen Mirren for my film. Can you convince her to do it? I sent her the script and she turned it down. And can you talk to her and tell her to do it?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I was a little bit lost." And that was the end of the evening. And then the next day, he sent me the script through his casting agent, saying, afterwards I thought that maybe you would want to read for the part. And so I did say I read the script, I liked it immediately, and strangely enough, as strange as Blue Velvet is, when I read the script I understood. I wasn't surprised when I saw the film. It was the surrealism was there, everything was already in the page. But I did ask him to play and rehearse, to test every scene, because it required nudity. She was obviously a sadomasochist coming from, this was my interpretation, that she had a Stockholm syndrome, but I wasn't sure. And I think other actresses said to me, that tested for the part, they said that they played her more like a hoary, like a, more, yes, maybe disturbed inside, but actually using sex to control. Instead, for me, it was more of a torment. So anyway, David did like my interpretation and offered me the part. But it was also important for me, while he was testing me, that this is the way I wanted to play her. Because I never thought I would be nude in a film. My mom said no, many times. So, and my family, it was very difficult for me to take my clothes off in a film. So it was important for my moral standard that it wasn't titillating nudity, but it wasn't a nudity. I didn't know how to express it in any other way. Otherwise we would have avoided nudity, but it had to be this. When it was this brutal rape, I felt that nudity would show it the best, and I agreed with David on that.
You took that part.
Thank you.
I think you were in that part, and then the movie was, I think, more niche and more actually weird.
Thanks. No, but I do think, I did, David said that he's inspired by what he doesn't understand, by the mystery. And I am also inspired by the mystery. And often films feel that they have to tell a story, and narratively you have to have a conclusion, a happy end or a sad ending. Instead, I understood that you can play the mystery, you can play the not understanding. Actually, the director that gave me the best answer about this one, it was Robert Wilson, the theater director. He sent me a script to work with me, and I read it and didn't understand anything. I came from a book of Umberto Eco, I read the book, didn't understand anything. I was so sad because I always wanted to work with Bob Wilson. So I called him up and I said, "Oh, Bob, you know, I feel so bad because I want to work with you so much, but I don't know that I can do this part because I don't understand any of it." And I tried to read it over and over again. And he said, "Oh, me too, I don't understand it either." and I said, "Oh, you don't?" And he said, "Well, if I understand it, why do it?" But you know, in a way, it's completely liberating. It's true. They are not there to tell you a story, to teach you a lesson. They're there to dive in what they don't understand. And David does it too. And to me, it's a great trip that you could take into the mystery. It's not the most commercial, but it is valid. Life is more mysterious to me than understandable.
It's a fact that actors give 3 performances. The one they prepare, the one that's given to the public, and maybe the most important one of all, the third one, that the actor gives to him or herself in front of the mirror in the dressing room or later on. Is there a memory of that last thought of a performance that you would have liked to have done over, or you would have thought that there was something you could have done differently that would have made a different impact and made the film something more than what it actually turned out?
Blue Velvet or any film?
But if there's one in particular that you would like to tell us.
Well, I have to say that I never really watch my film that much. I see them when they come out, or generally on private screenings. Some of it just to see what they edit. There's always something that it gets cut out, a scene altogether. I like to hear it with the music. I like to hear the other scene that I wasn't involved, what they looked like. And generally, the first time I see a film, I'm very distracted by all these new elements and I wasn't there, And then I have to see it a second time to see the film. And that's it. Then I never really watch them again. I find it very sad. When I watched Blue Velvet, I think of the days we were in Wilmington, and I get nostalgic of the time I've spent, or memory come back. So I never really watch my films. And I also think that there is a certain point where when you watch a film, there is always something that you say, "Oh, I should have done. I should have done a little bit more. I should have done. Could have made that clearer." I don't know. So you are full of sentimentos, and wishing to have done better. So maybe also is the reason why I don't really watch them, because there's always something I want to change. It's too late.
Somebody have the mic? Okay. Yeah.
It was wonderful hearing you talk so articulately about the work and about how you work. Did you learn about acting at your mother's knee, or did you have specific training as you got older?
No, I didn't, My mom once only told me one thing that at first shocked me, and then as I became of a more experienced actress, I thought, only a very, very good actress could have given me this advice. It was my first film, and my mom said, "When in doubt, do nothing, because there will always be the violins." She was completely right. When in doubt, do nothing, because the scene, the light will carry. But if you give too much emotions, then you go, and the emotion is the incorrect one, then the violins cannot carry you. So she was really great, because sometimes when you do a film, there is always one close-up, one little twist that you don't know how to play, or it's unclear, or a beat in the synthesis that the writers do. Sometimes there is a beat that maybe is missing from the writer and that you have to cover up as an actor. So it's best to do nothing and just let it glide with the other element that would come to form the film. But no, I wished I was able to work with both my father and mother, because my father must have had a lot of tricks up his sleeves. Having not worked with any actor, besides Anna Magnani and my mom, he believed that if you need a fisherman, you're better off hiring a fisherman because he would know how to do the netting and do the gestures that are right, and his face would look sunburned and his hands would be of a fisherman. And yes, he wouldn't know the lines, but it didn't matter in Europe, not in America, not in Anglo-Saxon countries, but the rest of the world, the films are dubbed. So people are not used, as you are in America, to synchronize lips and words. It's really an Anglo-Saxon thing. So he would then give words to the people, so they didn't matter that they didn't know their lines very well. Somebody else would fill in the words for them. But he had the authenticity of the faces. He never thought that Cary Grant, no matter how you get all the best makeup artists, no matter how much he tried to be in the part, he would never look like a fisherman. He would always look like Cary Grant doing the fisherman. He saw very strongly that artificiality. So I wish I would work with my dad too to see how he'd blend actor and non-actor. What was it? You know, I would have loved to learn more from them. But unfortunately, they died when I was in my 20s, so I never really had the opportunity to work with them. I learned by doing it. I had a very helpful coach called Sandra Seacat, who was a very known coach, and she was very helpful at making me understand what was acting. It was a little bit of a mystery to me. I always wanted to direct secretly, but I never knew how do you direct an actor. And then people asked me to act because I was a model. So I was hesitant. At first I didn't want to do it because my mother was so famous. And then I thought, oh, that's a stupid attitude. Let's do it. See, America, freedom. Let's do it, and I'd learn. I would learn. And then I liked it more than I thought. I never became a director. I mean, just wrote, my dad is 100 years old, and now I'm writing something else, but we'll see if it gets done.
We have time for one more.
Oh, there's one down here in the... 4 in the second row. Oh, first
I
row.
wanted to ask you what it was like working with Norman Mailer,
Yes.
Abel Ferrara, and also your performance in Saddest Losing the World is so wonderful. I wonder if you're planning anything else with Guy Madden.
Well, Guy and I would love working together, and so we are always thinking of what else we could do to be together. We became quite good friends. We always email, we call each other, spend little holidays together. He comes to New York, we go see museums and films and art. So we will seek for a project just for the pleasure of being together. I have to say that I enjoyed working with the same directors because there is a familiarity and you get the shorthand. I think that I envy the old theater companies where they were always together because there is something to be said about knowing each other and working a lot together. And I did have a little bit of collaboration with Campbell Scott or David Lynch that was more than one film. It makes a very big difference. Abel Ferrara and Norman Mailer. Abel Ferrara is crazy, insane, incredibly talented, and I don't even know how he makes his film that are not rational, but a lot of the film that I've done with him, I loved The Funeral, and it was pretty rational. It was a fantastic script. And the confusion in the set was astounding. I never knew if the camera was on or off. The confusion was so great you didn't even hear action, and yet the film was so wonderful. It's incredible how it works. And Norman Mailer, I didn't understand the film until I saw it. When I did Blue Velvet, there was this big scandal, and I was asked, I was with ICM, that was my mother's agency, but then there was a whole new agency, so there was no really, I wasn't at ICM because my mother was with ICM. It was, big agency, everything was new. But still, I was very happy to be in a very big agency. And when I did Blue Velvet, the agency was so angry at me because I'd done it, I don't know, I don't know, they weren't involved or I don't know. Often I do films, I let my agent know, but, they don't really want you to make films where there is no money. So they sometimes don't even, you have to make the deal yourself and all that. So Blue Velvet must have been one of those. And so they basically asked me to leave the agency. So there I was with, Lancôme wanting to fire me, the nuns giving masses, big acting agency asking me to leave. This was only my second film in America. I'd just done one film, so I thought, that was it. I was so desperate. I had a 2-year-old baby. I said, oh my God, what do I do? How am I going to pay my bills? I was really desperate. And here came great Tom Luddy. We were talking about him because he organizes the Telluride Film Festival, and he produced film, and he was producing the film with Norman Mailer, and he called me and he said, would you do a film with us? So I felt it was really rescuing me, giving me a sense of confidence, and I did the film. But I didn't understand it until I saw it, because I didn't understand that Norman Mailer really saw people as devilish. All my life I heard that you have to be compassionate, that people ultimately are good, that that there is goodness in everybody. And I was young and I still believed in it. Norman just thinks the opposite. He thinks the devil is in everybody. And this is a jungle and we are all surviving and, we're all opportunistic. But I didn't understand it. Because I didn't understand that philosophy. So when I did the film, I didn't capture it. I don't know that I did a very good job until I saw the film, and I actually thought the film was wonderful. It was the most unsuccessful film probably that I ever done. But there was this conviction that people are devil at the base, that the common denominator is that we are wolves, we are opportunistic. It was such a ferocious statement. So it was a great lesson. But I have to say, I was very grateful to be able to have people so known and so important to come and rescue me. It was great.
Not many people can say they were directed by Norman Mailer.
Yes.
Well, our great thanks to Isabella Rossellini.
Thank you.
And thank you to you.